some mountains don't want visitors, and some visitors never really leave. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. The more you engage, the more these chilling tales will find you. Now, let's step into the Appalachian darkness together. My name is Margaret. What I'm about to tell you happened when I was 34, newly divorced and single, during a time when I was trying to remember who I had been before everything fell apart. It was 1967, and I decided to spend 3 weeks alone in a rented cabin near a forgotten place called Harlan Hollow, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. I wasn't running from anything. At least, that's what I told myself. Gerald had left me for his secretary. How original. And our friends had quietly chosen sides. Most of them chose his. I needed distance from my surroundings, and I needed silence. I needed a space that was mine alone. I had to prove to myself that I could exist without anyone's approval or companionship. The cabin belonged to a woman named Mrs. Kilgore, whom I found through a newspaper advertisement. "Remote mountain retreat," it said. "Perfect for those seeking solitude. No neighbors for 5 miles." When I called, her voice was raspy, as if she had spent years smoking unfiltered cigarettes. "Are you sure you want to be alone up there?" she asked. "Absolutely," I replied. There was a long pause. "Some nights, the fog gets very thick, very thick. When it does, you should stay inside." I laughed, assuming it was just mountain superstition. "I'm not afraid of a little weather." Another silence. "It's not the weather you should worry about." I should have questioned what she meant, but at that moment, all I wanted was to get away from where I was, and so I didn't ask. The drive took 6 hours, the last 2 spent on what could barely be called roads. They were more like scars carved into the mountainside by someone who didn't believe in guardrails. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had already dipped behind the ridgeline, painting everything in surreal shades of orange and purple. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. The cabin was exactly what I had hoped for. Small, worn, isolated. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that smelled of old pine, a fireplace that looked older than my grandmother, and a porch that creaked with every step. Despite its age, I was eager to light the fireplace. The nearest town was Harlan, about 12 miles down the mountain, and according to Mrs. Kilgore's directions, there wasn't another living soul within shouting distance. Perfect. I spent the first evening unpacking and getting the fire going. The silence was immediate and absolute. No cars, no voices, no hum of electricity beyond the cabin's single overhead bulb. Just wind through the trees and the occasional crack of settling wood. It felt like the world had been put on mute. And for the first time in months, I could hear my own thoughts without Gerald's voice drowning them out. That first night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke to fog. Not the thin, delicate kind that burns off by 10 o'clock. This was dense, pressing against the windows like something solid. I could barely see the porch railing from inside. When I stepped outside with my coffee, the world had disappeared. Just gray, endless, suffocating gray. I walked to the edge of the porch and peered out. The trees were gone. The dirt path was gone. Everything beyond 15 feet had been erased. Fog, I muttered to myself. Just fog. But the silence bothered me. In fog, this thick, you'd expect muffled sounds, birds, wind, insects. There was nothing. Not even my own footsteps seemed to make noise. It was like the fog swallowed sound itself. I went back inside and spent the morning reading by the fire. By noon, the fog hadn't lifted. By evening, it was even thicker, if that was possible. I made dinner, canned soup and crackers, and tried not to think about how isolated I really was. That night, I heard the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the cabin door. I was sitting by the fire, halfway through a mystery novel, when the sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. My whole body tensed. I stared at the door, waiting. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same force. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. No response. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. The fog pressed against the glass, gray and impenetrable. I couldn't see anything, not even the porch steps. "Who's there?" I tried again, louder this time. Silence. Then, from just outside the door, a voice, soft, almost a whisper. "Margaret!" My blood went cold. It was my voice. Not similar, exact. The same inflection, the same slight rasp I got when I was tired. Like someone had recorded me and played it back. "Who are you?" I demanded, gripping the fireplace poker like a weapon. "Margaret," the voice repeated. Still mine, still wrong. I didn't open the door. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on the doorknob, watching for it to turn. It didn't. But the knocking started again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Then 3 more, over and over, for what felt like hours. I sat in the corner of the room, poker in hand, staring at that door until the fire burned down to embers and the first light of dawn crept through the windows. When morning came, the fog was gone. The knocking had stopped. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to find someone, or something, waiting. Nothing. Just an empty porch and the morning light filtering through the trees. But there, in the dirt at the bottom of the porch steps, were footprints. Bare feet. Small, like a child's. They circled the cabin 3 times, then stopped at the door. And they didn't lead away. They just ended. Would you have stayed, or would you have packed your car right then and driven away? Tell me in the comments. I spent that day trying to convince myself it was a prank. Some local kid messing with the out-of-towner. The voice? Maybe I'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, divorce does things to your mind, right? But the footprints were real. I took a photograph with my Polaroid camera just to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. That evening, I decided to drive down to Harlan and ask around. Maybe someone knew who'd been up at the cabin. Maybe there was a rational explanation. The general store in Harlan was the kind of place where everyone stops talking when a stranger walks in. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me as I approached the counter. "Help you?" the clerk asked. He was maybe 60, with a face like weathered leather. "I'm staying up at the Kilgore cabin," I said. "Had some strange visitors last night. Wondered if anyone around here might know who—" "Fog, come in," he interrupted. I blinked. Yes, heavy fog. He nodded slowly, exchanged a glance with an old woman sitting by the window. "You stayed inside, right?" Yes, but someone was outside. Someone knocked on my door." The old woman stood up, walked over, and stared at me with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. "Did you open the door?" "No," she exhaled, relief crossing her face. "Good, don't. Not when the fog's in." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand," the clerk said firmly. "You just need to listen. When the fog comes, you stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't answer if something knocks. Don't answer if something calls your name, even if it sounds like someone you know. Especially if it sounds like you." I stared at them both. "What is it? What's out there?" The old woman shook her head. "We don't got a name for it. Been here longer than any of us. Longer than this town. It watches. It waits. And if you let it in—" She trailed off, her eyes distant. "Just don't let it in." I drove back to the cabin as the sun set, my hands gripping the wheel so tight, my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, but another part, the stubborn part that had driven me here in the first place, refused to be scared off by superstitious locals and some fog. I'd stay. I'd prove there was nothing to fear. That night, the fog came back, thicker than before. By the time darkness fell, I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face when I stepped onto the porch. I locked every door, every window. I built the fire high and kept the poker close. And then, just after midnight, the knocking started again. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, staring at the door. "Margaret," my voice again, soft and pleading. "Please let me in. I'm so cold." I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. "Don't answer." Don't respond. Margaret, it's me. Don't you recognize me? Please, I need help. It sounded so real, so desperate. For a split second, I almost stood up, almost walked to the door. Then I remembered the footprints that didn't lead away. Margaret! The voice screamed, still mine, but distorted now, stretched and wrong like a recording played at the wrong speed. Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! The door shook, not from knocking, from something slamming against it with force. The hinges rattled. The wood creaked. I pressed myself into the corner, tears streaming down my face, poker raised. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. I waited, heart hammering, barely breathing. And then I heard it. Not at the door this time, at the window behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I turned slowly. Through the glass, through the fog, I saw a face. Pale, hollow-eyed, smiling. It was mine. Not similar, not a twin. My face, my exact face, down to the scar on my left eyebrow from when I'd fallen off my bike at age 7. But the eyes were empty. Black, endless. The thing wearing my face pressed its hand against the glass. Slowly, deliberately, it began to write in the condensation. Letmein. I screamed. I don't remember much after that. Just running to the bedroom, slamming the door, shoving the dresser against it, and curling up in the closet with the poker clutched to my chest. I stayed there until morning. When the sun rose, the fog lifted. I packed everything in 10 minutes flat, threw it all in my car, and drove. I didn't stop until I was 3 counties away. I called Mrs. Kilgore from a payphone and told her I was leaving early. She didn't sound surprised. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "What is it?" I whispered. "We don't rightly know. My granddaddy used to say it was something that got lost in the mountains a long time ago. Lost and angry. It watches people, learns them. And if you let it in..." She paused. "Well, you didn't let it in. That's what matters. Has anyone ever let it in?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Once, my cousin's husband, back in 52. He thought it was his wife calling for help in the fog. Opened the door. What happened? They found him 3 days later, sitting at the kitchen table, smiling. But he wasn't himself anymore. Talked different, moved different. His wife said his eyes were all wrong. He walked into the woods 2 weeks later, and they never found him again." I hung up without another word. I never went back to the Appalachians. Not to that cabin. Not to Kentucky. Not even close. But sometimes, on foggy nights, when I'm alone in my apartment and the world goes quiet, I hear it. 3 slow knocks, and a voice. My voice, soft and pleading. "Margaret, let me in." I never do. I never will. But I know it's still waiting. Some things don't give up. They just wait for you to forget to lock the door. The second Appalachian horror I need to tell you about happened 7 years later, in the summer of 1974. I was 41 then, and I had convinced myself that I was no longer afraid of anything. After what happened in Harlan Hollow, I had spent years in therapy. The therapy had worked, and I was able to sleep again without keeping all the lights on. I had even begun seeing a kind man named Robert, who never pushed me to talk about the things I didn't want to remember. That summer, Robert invited me to join his church's volunteer group for a 1-week youth camp in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. He was one of the camp counselors, and they needed additional adults to help supervise 23 teenagers from various churches across the state. The camp was called Pine Haven. It had been founded in 1952, and according to the brochure, it sat on 40 acres of untouched mountain forest, complete with hiking trails, a lake, and cabins that could accommodate up to 50 people. I didn't want to turn down Robert's invitation. The plan seemed safe and wholesome. It was the kind of place where the worst thing that might happen would be a child getting poison ivy or sneaking a cigarette behind the dining hall. But I was terribly wrong. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon in late June. The camp was exactly as advertised. A cluster of weathered wooden cabins arranged in a horseshoe around a central fire pit, with the main lodge positioned at the far end, overlooking the lake. The air smelled of pine needles and sunscreen. The kids were buzzing with excitement, loudly sorting themselves into groups. Eventually, they settled down and began unpacking into their bunks. Robert squeezed my hand as we carried our bags inside. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this isn't really your kind of thing." He was right. It wasn't. But I was trying. I was trying to be normal. I was trying to prove to myself that what had happened in Kentucky was just an isolated incident, a one-time encounter. At least this time, someone I trusted was with me. The first 3 days were completely ordinary. We held Bible study sessions in the mornings, supervised swimming lessons in the afternoons, and gathered around the fire at night to sing songs and roast marshmallows. The kids were well behaved, though naturally exhausting. Their energy never seemed to run out. The other counselors were friendly. Everything felt safe. Then, on the 4th night, 3 children did not return from a hike. Their names were Marcus, Joel, and Tim, all 15, all from the same church in Richmond, all inseparable. They'd asked permission to take the Red Trail, a moderate 3-mile loop that circled the eastern ridge and came back down past the lake. Robert had given them the go-ahead, handed them flashlights and a walkie-talkie, and told them to be back by 7 for dinner. By 8 o'clock, they still weren't back. By 9, we organized search parties. Robert led one group up the Red Trail. Another counselor named Frank took the blue trail on the opposite side of camp. I stayed behind with the other adults to keep the remaining kids calm and accounted for. Around 10:30, Robert's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie. "We found them." Relief flooded through me. "Thank God. Are they okay?" There was a pause, a long one. They're fine, physically. But Margaret, something's wrong. They won't talk. They won't even look at us. Just keep staring back at the woods. What do you mean they won't talk? I mean, they're not speaking at all. Just standing there like statues. We're bringing them down now. When the search party returned, the 3 boys walked in a perfect line, eyes fixed straight ahead, faces completely blank. No tears, no relief, no acknowledgement of the frantic adults surrounding them. They moved in sync, like puppets on the same string. We sat them down in the lodge, wrapped them in blankets, tried to get them to drink water. Nothing. They just stared at the wall behind us, unblinking, barely breathing. "Boys," Robert said gently, kneeling in front of Marcus. "What happened out there? Did you get lost? Did you see something?" Marcus's mouth moved. No sound came out at first, just his lips forming words silently. Then, barely a whisper, "We found the camp." "You're at the camp," Robert said. "You're safe now." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, the camp beneath the camp." A chill ran down my spine. Joel and Tim nodded in perfect unison, their eyes never leaving that spot on the wall. "What does that mean?" I asked. "What camp?" Tim finally spoke, his voice flat and hollow. "The one under the ground, where they're still singing." Have you ever heard something that made your blood run cold without understanding why? Tell me below. The camp director, a woman named Mrs. Howell, decided the boys were in shock and needed medical attention. She called for an ambulance, but the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away. While we waited, I sat with them, trying to keep them calm. That's when I noticed the dirt under their fingernails. Not just a little, thick, black, packed deep like they'd been digging. And their shoes were caked with mud, even though it hadn't rained in days and the trail was bone dry. "Where did you go?" I asked softly. "What did you dig up?" Marcus turned his head toward me for the first time. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "We didn't dig down," he whispered. "We fell through." Before I could ask what he meant, all 3 boys stood up simultaneously and walked to the window. They pressed their faces against the glass, breath fogging the pane, and pointed toward the dark tree line beyond the fire pit. "They're coming," Joel said. "Who's coming?" Robert asked, standing beside me. "The singers," all 3 boys said in unison. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, we heard it. Singing, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Children's voices, high and clear, singing what sounded like an old hymn. But the melody was wrong, off-key, dissonant, like it had been played backwards and then corrupted. Mrs. Howell went pale. That's Amazing Grace," she whispered. "But it sounds—" "Wrong," I finished. The boys started singing along, softly at first, then louder, their voices blending with the ones from the woods. The same off-key, broken melody. They swayed side to side, eyes closed, smiles spreading across their faces. Robert grabbed Marcus by the shoulders. "Stop it! Marcus, stop!" Marcus's eyes snapped open. They were black, completely black, like someone had filled them with ink. "They want us to come back," he said. "They need more singers. The concert's almost ready." The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. The boys went silent the moment the paramedics walked in, collapsing like marionettes with cut strings. They were loaded onto stretchers and driven away, still unconscious. We never saw them again. Mrs. Howell canceled the rest of the camp. Parents were called, kids were sent home, and by noon the next day, Pine Haven was empty, except for Robert, Mrs. Howell, Frank, and me. "We need to find out what happened," Robert said. "For their parents, for the boys. We need to know what they saw." Mrs. Howell shook her head. "Leave it alone. There are things in these mountains that what?" Robert demanded. "You know something. What is it?" She looked at each of us, then sighed. This camp was built on old land. Before it was Pine Haven, it was something else. Back in the 1920s, there was a children's home here. Orphanage, they called it. But it was more like a prison. The woman who ran it, Constance Merrill, she was a fanatic, religious zealot. She believed children were born sinful and needed to be purified through suffering. My stomach turned. What did she do to them? Punishments, starvation, beatings, and when they misbehaved, she'd lock them in the root cellar beneath the main building for days at a time. No light, no food, just darkness, and hymns played on a gramophone. She said music would cleanse their souls. "How many children died?" Frank asked quietly. Mrs. Howell looked away. 17. Over the course of 5 years. The state finally investigated in 1928. After a fire killed Constance and burned the orphanage to the ground, they buried the children in unmarked graves somewhere on the property. When the church bought the land in 1952, they built Pine Haven on top of it. We were told the graves were removed, relocated to a proper cemetery. "Were they?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I don't think so." That night, Robert and I took flashlights and walked the red trail. We had to see for ourselves, had to understand. About a mile in, we found it. A sinkhole, fresh, maybe 10 feet wide. The earth collapsed inward like something had given way from below. The edges were still crumbling, dirt sliding into the darkness. Robert aimed his flashlight down. The beam didn't reach the bottom, just black. And from that blackness came the faintest sound, singing, children's voices, that same broken, backwards hymn. "We need to leave," I said. grabbing Robert's arm. "Right now!" But Robert knelt at the edge, leaning forward, squinting into the hole. "There's something down there. I can see." "Margaret, there are stairs. Stone stairs leading down." "Robert, please. We need to go." He pulled out the walkie-talkie and handed it to me. "Go back to camp. Call the police. I'm going to see what's down there." "Absolutely not." "Someone needs to know the truth. Those boys are gone, Robert. And if you go down there, you will be too." He looked at me, his face set with that stubborn determination I'd come to know too well. "I have to, for them, before I could stop him." He lowered himself over the edge and began climbing down the stone stairs, his flashlight bobbing in the darkness. I stood there, frozen, listening to his footsteps fade, then silence. "Robert?" I called into the hole. No response. "Robert!" And then, from deep below, I heard his voice, singing that same hymn, off-key, wrong. Then another voice joined his, and another, a chorus of children, all singing together in that horrible, distorted harmony. And Robert's voice, now blending with theirs, rising up from the dark. "Come down, Margaret. Come sing with us. We've been waiting for you." I ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until I reached the camp, gasping and sobbing. Mrs. Howell called the police. They came with search and rescue teams, ropes, equipment. They went down into that sinkhole. They found the root cellar. Constance Merrill's root cellar, perfectly preserved beneath 40 years of earth and time. The walls were covered in scratches, children's fingernails clawing at stone, and in the center of the room, arranged in a perfect circle, were 17 small skeletons. But they didn't find Robert. No body, no clothes, no flashlight. Just a gramophone in the corner, covered in dust and cobwebs. And when they tried to lift it, it started playing on its own. Amazing grace. Backwards, distorted. Wrong. I left Virginia that day and never went back. The camp was shut down permanently. The sinkhole was filled in, the property sold to the state, and left to grow wild. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, singing, faint and distant, like it's coming from underground. And I recognize one of the voices in the chorus. It's Robert's, still singing, still waiting, still calling me to come down and join them. I never will. But I know he's still there, in that dark room beneath the earth, singing hymns with the children who never got to leave. Some places never let you go. They just wait for you to get close enough to pull you under. The third and final Appalachian horror I need to tell you about happened in October of 1982, 8 years after Robert disappeared. I never recovered from losing Robert. I was 49 years old, and for nearly a decade, I had stayed away from anything that even resembled mountains. But life has a way of testing you with the very things you fear the most. My younger sister, Catherine, had died that spring. Fast and merciless breast cancer. We had never been particularly close, but her death left me with an inheritance I never wanted. A small hunting cabin she had purchased years earlier near a place called Raven's Peak, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. According to her lawyer, she had only visited it once, found it too isolated, and never returned. She had continued paying the property taxes for 15 years. No matter what I did, the Appalachian Mountains refused to let go of me. It was as if those mountains had a different kind of claim. I needed to see the cabin. I needed to understand why she had held on to something she never used. And perhaps, if I was honest with myself, I needed to prove that I could face the mountains one more time without breaking apart. It felt as though this inheritance was some kind of sign. The journey took nearly a full day. Raven's Peak didn't appear on major maps. It was marked only as a dot on a Forestry Service map and a worn sign at a turnoff that read, "Private road, no trespassing." Here we go again, I thought to myself. The cabin sat at the end of a 3-mile dirt road that twisted through dense forest and rocky outcroppings. By the time I finally reached the small clearing, the sun had already dipped behind the ridge. This time, I told myself, I would not be taken in by the beauty of the place. This time, I believed I was more cautious, more experienced. The cabin was smaller than I had imagined, essentially a single room, a main living area with a wood-burning stove, a loft bed reached by a ladder, and a tiny bathroom that looked like it had been added later as an afterthought. The windows were intact, but coated with years of grime and pollen. The air smelled of mold and mouse droppings. I spent the first hour cleaning, sweeping out debris, airing out the musty interior. I'd brought enough supplies for 3 days: canned food, bottled water, a sleeping bag, and a battery-powered lantern. My plan was simple. Go through Catherine's things, decide what to keep, and put the property up for sale. That was the plan. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. No insects, no birds settling in for the evening, no wind through the trees, just absolute silence pressing in from all sides. I made dinner on the old propane stove, canned chili that tasted like tin, and sat by the window, watching darkness consume the clearing. That's when I saw the first one, a wooden cross, tall, maybe 6 feet high, planted at the edge of the tree line, about 50 yards from the cabin. It was crude, made from 2 pieces of rough lumber lashed together with what looked like old rope. In the dim light from my lantern, I could just make out something hanging from the crossbar. Bones, small ones, strung together like a wind chime. I told myself it was a property marker. Or maybe some kind of hunting territory boundary. Mountain people did strange things sometimes. I closed the curtains and tried to ignore it. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cabin settling, every distant crack of a branch had me sitting up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps on the porch, not hesitant or careful, deliberate, heavy steps. Walking from one end of the porch to the other, then back again, over and over in a steady rhythm. I crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. In the moonlight, I could see the porch clearly. There was no one there. But the footsteps continued. I could hear the boards creaking under weight that didn't exist. Back and forth, back and forth. Then they stopped, right in front of the door. I held my breath, staring at that door, waiting for a knock that never came. After what felt like hours, I heard the footsteps retreat. Not down the porch steps, but around the side of the cabin, fading into silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just sat with my back against the wall, a kitchen knife in my lap, watching the door until dawn broke. Morning brought no comfort. When I stepped outside to survey the property, I found more crosses. 7 of them now, arranged in a perfect semicircle around the cabin, each one decorated with bones and what looked like animal teeth. And carved into each cross, deep gouges that formed crude symbols I didn't recognize. But it was what I found behind the cabin that made my stomach turn. A trail, narrow, barely visible, leading up into the woods. And pressed into the soft earth at the trailhead were footprints. Bare feet, large, adult-sized. The toes splayed wide, like whoever, or whatever, had made them wasn't used to walking upright. They led up the mountain, and they led back down, overlapping, like the thing had walked the path multiple times, recently. Would you have followed those tracks? Or would you have gotten in your car right then? Tell me what you would do. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to get in the car and drive until the mountains were a memory in my rearview mirror. But I needed to know, needed to understand what Catherine had been running from all those years ago. I followed the trail. It climbed steeply through thick underbrush and over moss-covered rocks. The forest grew darker the higher I went. The canopy overhead so dense it blocked out most of the sunlight. After about 20 minutes, the trail opened into a small clearing, and in the center of that clearing stood a structure. It wasn't a building, not exactly, more like a shrine. Dozens of rocks stacked in a careful spiral, rising maybe 10 feet high, with a hollow center. Around the base were more bones, more symbols carved into the stones, and hanging from branches all around the clearing were objects. Personal items, a child's shoe, a wristwatch, a pair of glasses, a locket, all of them old, weathered, suspended on strings like grotesque Christmas ornaments. And in the center of the stone spiral, on a flat rock that looked like an altar, was a photograph. I approached slowly, my hands shaking. The photo was in a plastic bag, protected from the elements. When I picked it up, my blood went cold. It was Catherine, much younger, maybe in her early 20s, standing in front of the cabin. She was smiling, holding up a fish she'd caught. Behind her, partially visible in the background, was a figure, tall, impossibly thin. Its arms hung down past its knees. Where its face should have been was just smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank flesh stretched over bone. I dropped the photo and stumbled backward. That's when I heard it, breathing. Deep, rasping breaths coming from the trees behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just shadows and undergrowth. But the breathing continued, circling around me, moving from tree to tree. Then I saw it, standing at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a thick oak, was the thing from the photograph. Taller than any human should be, its body bent at wrong angles, limbs too long and jointed in too many places. The smooth, featureless face tilted toward me, and though it had no eyes, I knew it was watching me. It took one step forward. The movement was wrong, jerky and stuttering, like a film with missing frames. I ran down that trail faster than I thought possible, branches tearing at my clothes and face, roots trying to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear it following, not running, just that same stuttering, impossible movement, somehow keeping pace no matter how fast I went. I burst out of the tree line and sprinted toward the cabin, slammed the door behind me, shoved the heavy table against it, grabbed the knife again, and pressed myself into the corner. The breathing was right outside the door. Then the knocking started, not on the door, on every surface. The walls, the windows, the floor beneath me, all at once. A cacophony of knocking, like 100 fists pounding in perfect synchronization. And then it stopped. Silence. I waited, barely breathing, knife clutched so hard my knuckles were white. Then I heard my sister's voice, muffled, like she was speaking through cloth. "Margaret, I'm still here. I never left. It won't let me leave." "Catherine," I whispered, "it's been waiting for you. It knew you'd come back. It always knows." "What is it? What does it want?" "To add you to the collection, like it added me. Like it's been adding people for 100 years." I looked at the photograph in my hand, the one I'd somehow carried back with me without realizing. In the background, behind Catherine and the faceless figure, I could now see other shapes, dozens of them, blurred and indistinct, standing among the trees. All of them tall, all of them wrong. "Run!" Catherine's voice said, now coming from above me, from the loft. Run now. Don't stop. Don't look back. And never, ever come back to these mountains. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my car keys, threw open the door, and ran to my car. Behind me, I could hear them emerging from the woods. Footsteps, so many footsteps, all converging on the clearing. I started the engine and floored it, the car fishtailing on the dirt road. In my rearview mirror, I saw them. 7 figures standing in a line at the edge of the clearing, all impossibly tall, all featureless, all perfectly still, watching me leave. I drove for 3 hours straight. Didn't stop until I hit a rest area on the interstate, far from any mountains, surrounded by lights and people and the comforting noise of civilization. I never went back, never tried to sell the property, never spoke about what I saw. But 6 months later, I received a letter. No return address, postmarked from a town near Raven's Peak I'd never heard of. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed the cabin, my car parked in front, and me standing on the porch facing the woods. The photo was dated the day I'd arrived, but I'd been completely alone. No one had taken that picture, and standing in the tree line behind me, barely visible but unmistakable, were 8 tall figures, one more than before. I've lived a long life, far from the Appalachian Mountains. I've never hiked again, never camped, never set foot on a trail, because I know they're still there, still waiting, still watching, and I know that somewhere in those mountains, in a clearing around a stone spiral shrine, there's a photograph of me, added to their collection, a promise that one day, when I'm not careful enough, or scared enough, or fast enough, they'll come to collect what they believe is theirs. Some mountains are beautiful, some are ancient, and some are hungry. The Appalachians are all 3. If you've listened to all 3 stories, thank you for bearing witness to the things I've spent decades trying to forget. Subscribe for more horror stories and leave a comment telling me, would you have run sooner than I did? Or would curiosity have kept you there until it was too late? Because that's what the mountains count on. Your curiosity, your disbelief, your certainty that there's a logical explanation for everything. There isn't. Some things can't be explained. They can only be survived. Some mountains never forget the people who walk their trails.